All right, everybody, today we are going to talk about a topic that many of you probably already know, and hopefully this is a review, which would be great, slope. So if you've seen this before, great. If not, hopefully it helps. And there might be a few things in here that you haven't seen before. So I'm just going to start with a basic idea of what is slope. I have several things that in my mind are similar statements. So slope is equal to rise over run, which a lot of us use that whenever we went through high school. So maybe you've seen that in an algebra class somewhere. Or you might have been told it's the change in the y values over the change in the x values. Or you might have used this formula, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And some of you might even know that the variable we normally use for slope is a lowercase m. So I have a graph I'm going to show you, and we'll talk about the slope on that guy, and we'll talk about several different ways to find slope, and we'll take it from there. So here's my x, here's my y. If I go down to the -2, and if I'm over here at the 3, okay. If my graph goes through both of those points, notice that I'm using the intercept method to get my graph. So I've got the y-intercept down here, the x-intercept over there, and we know that any 2 points, I can draw a straight line through them. So using those 2 points, there's my line. This is at the point x equals 3. You can put your points if you would like. This is 0, -2, and this is the point 3 and 0. So if you wanted to go between this point and that point, the rise would be go up 2, rise 2, and the run would be go over 3, 1, 2, 3. So the rise over the run would be 2 over 3. So probably we have a pretty good idea of what this slope looks like, 2 over 3, rise over run. But I'm going to go ahead and make sure we can use this formula and that everybody knows how to substitute in. And we are good. Okay, so the formula says y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Well, if I've got that, it's easier for me to see it and to just go, oh, it's 2/3 if I have zeros in the points, right? But let's make sure we got it down. So if this is my x and this is my y, x always comes first. I can pick either one of those points. So I'm going to pick this one to be my first point, x sub 1, y sub 1. And I'm going to pick this one to be my x sub 2, y sub 2. Okay. If that's the case, then I'm going to start here with y sub 2 because that's what the formula tells me to do. And that's a 0 minus y sub 1 here is -2. Okay. X sub 2, which is how I start the bottom, is a 3 minus, and the x sub 1 is a 0. Okay, and it does not matter which one of these points I used first. What matters is that I'm consistent. So in other words, my point was 3, 0. If I started with y sub 2 as 0, then I have to keep it up so that the point lines up. So 0 and x from the same point. Okay, the x value is 3. I can't do a 0 here from this y and the 0 here from that x. So I have to be very consistent with which one goes first. Well, this is 0, a negative and a negative is a +2. And this is 3 minus 0, so this is 2 over 3. And sure enough, we get the same slope that we thought we had. So that's the idea that goes on behind that. So I'm going to give you a couple of points, and I want you to find the slope. So that's what your directions are going to look like in the homework, on the test, and stuff like that. Find the slope between, here's my point, 4, -2, and -1, 5. Those are my 2 points. And you can label either one of them you want as your first point, as long as you're consistent. So I'm going to label this my x1, y1, And the second one, my x2, because this one came first, this one came second, no other reason. Y2. If you flipped it, that's fine. Your work will look slightly different from mine, but you'll get the same, same answer, and that's what we're after, right? So M equals Y2 minus Y1 over X2 minus X1. You don't always have to rewrite that formula repeatedly. I'm just doing it so that we have consistency. If you do choose to rewrite it, then you'll memorize it faster. So just know that, okay? So I'm gonna give you just a second and I'm gonna work this out. I'm gonna pause my end of the video. I'm gonna work this out. You pause your end of the video, see if you can get the answer, and we'll see if we come out the same, all right? Okay, so I'm hoping that you were able to do the work. And what I've got for my answer is -7/5. And as long as you only have one negative sign on this guy, it doesn't matter where you put it. So in other words, if you had the -7 on top and the 5 on the bottom, or if you put the negative out in front and had 7/5, these are all equivalent, right? It doesn't matter. I left my negative on the bottom because that's where my negative was. So I plugged in 5 minus, because there's a minus in the formula, -2, because I used this guy for my Y1. And on the bottom, -1 minus, and the minus came from the formula, and the X1 value was a 4. So that becomes 5 negative, and a negative is a plus. -1 minus 4, and so 5 plus 2 is 7. -1 minus 4 is -5. So I left my negative on the bottom just because it was the -1 minus 4 that was the -5. But if you moved your negative sign around, it is perfectly legal, mathematically speaking, for you to do that, as long as there is only one negative sign in your final answer, okay? So that's kind of what these problems look like whenever you're just asked to find the slope. That's a basic question, but then of course they can't leave it at that. You're going to end up with other stuff that you have to do, like writing equations and stuff like that. So a slope-intercept form of the line. You may have seen these before. That's okay. Slope-intercept form of a line looks like y equals mx plus b, where the m here is the same slope that I've been working with, right? This is my slope. And the b here is my y-intercept. And we like the y-intercept because if we can start with our y-intercept, let me come back up here to this picture we had earlier. If we knew that our y-intercept was -2, and we know that our slope is 2/3, then from this y-intercept, I can go up 2 over 3. Rise 2, run 3, and get my other point, even if they didn't give it to me. So then I can draw my line. Okay, so that's kind of the idea behind this. Slope-intercept form is if you know the slope and you know the y-intercept, then you can write the equation of the line and move on from there. So we really like that form of the line. Unfortunately, we don't normally just get, here's your slope, here's your y-intercept, and just plug it into an equation. A lot of times what they're going to do is just give me the slope and a point, or they're just going to give me 2 points. Like we did earlier, we had these 2 points. Now what? Okay. Well, what it ends up looking like for that one is we have a different form of a line. Okay. There's one that's called the point slope form. And interestingly enough for me to get to the point slope form, basically what you do is you have this m equals y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And I'm writing this m over 1 because we can write anything over 1. And I want to move this guy out of the denominator, the x2 minus x1. If you do that, then what you end up doing is just multiply by x2 minus x1 on both sides of the equation. And what you'll end up with looks like this. The y2 minus y1 is going to be by itself. But if I multiply this by both sides, I'm going to have that equals m times x2 minus x1. Okay. And the general form of the line just basically looks just like this, but they drop the twos basically. Okay, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, and that is the point slope form, and that's the one we're going to use more often than not. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Just a second ago, we had these 2 points. Find the equation of the line. These are the kinds of directions you're going to see. Find the equation of the line that passes through and they give me the 2 points for -2 and -1, 5. Okay, well, we happen to already know the slope for that guy, right? We just found it. We had it right here. We just did this problem. So the m equals -7/5. If we didn't know that, we would need to find the slope. Okay, but we just found it. So I'm going to use the fact that we just found this guy and we're going to go from there. So the formula that we're going to use is the point slope formula. So again, that guy looks like y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And sometimes I get asked, why did they drop the x2 and the y2? Why did they drop the twos basically? And the reason is because for this formula, we want to keep this y and this x generic. We want them to stay x's and y's. We don't want to put in a point or numbers. And so all we need is 1 point. We don't need both of the points once we get to this point where we are trying to find the equation of the line. Okay, they just drop the 2. You could keep the 2's, but just realize I'm only substituting in one of the points. Okay, so then I get the question, well, how do you know which point? And the answer is it just doesn't matter which point. Okay, so I'm going to say, look, I'm going to have something here for the m. I'm going to plug something in for the m, and I'm going to plug something in for the x1, and I'm going to plug something in for the y1. So basically what I've done is I've recopied this, but left this x and this y generic. They're just variables. Okay, so when we go to plug in, what's the m? Well, we already know that, -7/5. Plug that in right there. And I need to plug in for one of the x's and one of the y's. And it just doesn't matter which one you want. And sometimes we can look here and go, oh, one has a negative, one doesn't. I'm going to choose the one that either has the negative or doesn't have the negative. Depends on how you want to work on it. It just doesn't matter because both of these have negatives. So I'm going to just pick this first one. You're going to be my x1 and my y1. Okay. So the x1 goes with the x. We group those together, the x's. So it's a 4 back here. And the y goes with the y. Y1 with the y. It's a -2 because the point was a -2. And I write it right there. And we know as we go to simplify this thing, a negative and a negative is going to be a positive. Y plus 2 equals, I'm going to leave this -7/5 out here, times x minus 4, right? Okay. So it would be nice if we could stop there, but we can't. We're supposed to simplify it and solve for y basically, is because we want this to end up looking like it's a slope intercept form. So y equals mx plus b is kind of the default. We're headed there. So let me distribute this guy through. The -7/5 is going to go through. That's your first step. So y plus 2, that's just along for the ride, is equal to -7/5 x. A negative times a negative is a positive. And remember, this 4 is really over a 1. I can always write a 1 over a 4 over a 1, any number over a 1. So how do we multiply? Negative times a negative, positive. When we're multiplying fractions, we go straight across the top. So the 7 times the 4, 28. And then on bottom, I've got 5 times 1. So that's just a 5. All right. And then the last step here is get the y by itself. I'm adding 2, so I'm going to subtract 2. That's going to go away. -2 back here. I'm going to be a little bit careful here because I'm subtracting this 2 from this guy who has a 5 as a denominator. So if you want to, you can make this a second step, but I'm just going to write it right here. What is 2 with a 5 as a denominator. Because remember, when I'm adding and subtracting, I need a common denominator. So if it was 5 over 5, that would be a 1, but I want it to be a 2. So that's 10 over 5. If you need to do that in a separate step, then do it in a separate step. That's fine. But I'm just going to do it right there. Y equals, just copying stuff down. -7/5 x, that comes down. And then I've got a 28/5 minus a 10/5. They have common denominator because I just put it together. 28 minus 10 is a positive 18 over 5. There we go. And if you use the other point, you should still end up with the same y equals equation going on there. So there you have it. All right. Okay, so I'm going to give you one to work on. And again, feel free to pause the video if you would like to have a little bit of time to work on it for yourself. Okay, write the equation. These directions are going to be find the equation or write the equation, stuff like that. Of the line with m equals 4 that goes through the point -1, 3. All right. So hopefully you're looking at that going, well, at least they gave me the slope, so I can go straight to the point slope formula instead of having to deal with the slope intercept form, and that is true. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And again, I will say, if you write this equation, this formula, lots of times, you'll get used to it pretty quickly. And you'll have that formula memorized pretty fast. So that's always a good thing. Okay. Well, this is my m. This is my x1. This is my y1, because it's always alphabetical inside of the coordinate system. So here I'm going to do y minus, there's going to be something there for the slope, and x minus something there for the x. So what are we plugging in? The slope, the m is a 4, right? Trying to do this in different colors so we can see it. The y1 was a 3, so there's a minus from the formula, and then the y was a 3. And then the x1 here is the x1 here, a -1. There's a minus from the formula, and then I'm putting in a -1. Excuse me, so that's going to be a negative and a negative. So when I multiply that through, I know I'm going to have a positive. All right. So over here on the left, y minus 3 equals 4 times x. Negative and a negative is a positive, so that's x plus 1. And now we have something we can work with, right? We've got all these things plugged in. Now I need to just solve for y, basically. So I'm going to distribute first. Y minus 3 equals 4 times x is 4x. 4 times 1 is 4. So work through this on your own pace. If you need to slow down, you can slow down. If you need to pause the video, pause the video. I'm just kind of running through it because I feel like we know how to solve for y. So I'm just going to move on. Let me know if you have a problem. Here I've got y minus 3. I want the y by itself, so I'm going to add 3 to both sides of the equation. This guy goes away. And I've got y equals 4x. And I've got a plus 4 and a plus 3, so I think it's plus 7. Y equals 4x plus 7. There you go. And you know, if you're not sure, you want to check yourself, that kind of thing, you can always go back and graph these where the y-intercept is a 7 and the slope is a 4. And check yourself and make sure that that goes through the point -1, 3. It better, right? But you can always go back and double check. All right. Now, there are a couple of special cases that we're going to deal with, okay? And we'll see what these look like. The first one, the example goes something like this. Write the line, or I'm sorry, write the equation of the line that goes through, and they give me a point. This one's -5, -2. Okay. And has an m equals 0. Okay. Well, what the heck does m equals 0 mean? Okay. For our purposes, if we're talking about slope, let me give you a little graph over here, and we'll use a pen to show us what's going on. We haven't really discussed positives and negatives, but earlier we had a up 2 and over 3, right? And the graph looked like that. So there's a little trick. If you have a slope that's a positive slope, then it will be, if you always read from left to right, you start at the bottom of with the line and work your way up. So positive slopes go up. If you have a negative slope, again, reading from left to right, you'll start at the top and go down. You're decreasing, right? It's like increasing and decreasing. Okay. But if you have slope equals 0, that particular guy means it's sitting there flat. So we always thought about it like this whenever I was learning this stuff. If we're talking about slope, think about driving your car. Okay. If you're driving your car along here and it's just flat, then there's no slope. It's not going up, it's not going down, it's just m equals 0. Okay, some people will call that no slope. Okay. If you come up upon a hill and you start going up, that's positive. That's a positive slope, right? You're rising. Okay. If you get to the top and you start coming down, that's a negative slope, right? You're decreasing. So this is increase, this is decrease, okay? And then if you're down here at the bottom and you're just going along flat again, that's m equals 0. So for our purposes, if you're thinking everything's flat, then you're just going to be like on a flat away or on the plains of Texas or something out in West Texas. Nothing's going on, right? So this guy's going to have m equals 0, which means he's going to be a horizontal line. Whenever I see that in my head, I think, oh, that's a horizontal line. I can do this. So all I need to do is find this point, -5, -5, -2. Remember, it's always the x and then the y. -5, -2. All right, there he is. And I need to look at what that guy is going to look like. Well, he's a horizontal line that goes through this point, -5, -2, which means he looks like that. Okay. And when I do that, I'm like, well, okay, the x values are going from -infinity to positive infinity, but the y is staying the same. No matter where I am on the x value, this y equals -2, right? And that's exactly what we're going to think about here, is that the y equals -2. That's what a horizontal looks like. Horizontal lines equation looks like. I'll show you the math for it, but this is exactly what's going on. The other thing that I was told once upon a time is if you've got a horizontal line, you know, people say, oh, they went to get horizontal, right? And that means that they're taking a nap or whatever. So I was told if you have a guy and he's laying down taking a nap and he has all these dream bubbles coming up out of his head, those are all zeros. So his slope, because he's laying down, is 0. I don't know if it's makes that much sense or if you like it, but if it helps you to remember, then great. If not, just find some way that works for you. Okay. For this one, we're going to go ahead and plug in. I'm going to show you the math now. I'm telling you this is the equation we're after, but we're going to use the math and use the formula we have, y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, and we're going to go from there. So here we said the m is 0. We're going to plug in there. And we have a point, right? Here's my x1 and here's my y1. So we're going to plug in there as well. So when I go to plug in y minus, what's my y1? I'm going to write it right here. -2 equals, equals. What's my m? Well, we know the m is a 0, right? So 0 times x minus, because there's a minus in the formula, and my x value here is a -5. So I'm going to plug in a -5. So here I've got y minus -2, that's y plus 2 equals, and over here I end up with 0 times x plus 5, but I'm hoping that in your head you're going, wait a minute, 0 times anything is what? 0, right? So, I mean, you can go ahead and distribute that through, but this is just going to be a 0 on the right-hand side. So that multiplying by 0 makes that whole entire side be a 0. And then whenever you go to solve for the y, you subtract your 2 from both sides, and you get y equals -2. And hey, look, that's what I said, right? So that is the math that proves that we were correct. Our y value is always -2 for this horizontal line. Okay. So, and the other thing is, if I see an equation that's just y equals some number, then in my head, I'm hoping that I'm thinking, oh, that's a horizontal line. Because otherwise I'd have an x value involved, right? Okay. The other example, as you might expect, is a vertical line. Now, go back to my driving example. I might have a positive or an incline, positive slope, might have a decline or negative slope, but will I ever be able to drive straight up and down in my car? Can I come up to the side of the cliff and just go whoop and go straight 90 degrees up? The answer is no. Okay, I cannot drive like that. Cannot go straight up and down. So whenever I'm thinking, hey, I might have a vertical line, I'm thinking I can't do that in my car. Okay, so undefined slope goes with vertical line. Or the slope is undefined. I cannot drive my car that way. Okay, I don't know what the heck is going on here. It's just a straight up and down thing. So here's the example. Write the equation of the line. Write the equation of the line with undefined slope. Undefined slope that goes through -3, -4. And there's my point. Okay. And we're going to look at this graph real quickly, because this one, unfortunately, I can't use the formula for, because, hey, I can't put undefined slope into the formula, right? That doesn't even make sense. I can't do it. But I can still graph this point, 1, 2, 3, -4. Here's this point, 3, -4. And I can say, oh, I know this is going to be vertical because of the undefined slope, right? So that's going to be a straight up and down line. Okay. And just like when we did the horizontal lines and we said, oh, the y value is always -2, here the y values are changing, but my x value is always the same thing, right? It doesn't matter if I'm right here or if I'm down here or if I'm way up there. It just doesn't matter. My x value is always what? X equals 3. Okay. So these are the ones I kind of like, because if you recognize undefined slope means it's a vertical line, then you can literally just look at your point, find your x value, and say, hey, x equals 3, always. All right. So that's it for that information. The slope equation, or the slope section. If you're in Blitzer, this is your 2.3 homework. If you're just watching this video separately, then that is just a basic review of what slope is. I hope it helps, and I'll see y'all soon. Thanks.